This episode of Guitar Radio Show is brought to you in part by
BMF Effects, bmffx.com. Built by hand in Southern California, BMF Effects captures the tones in your record collection and brings them to life. Overdrive, fuzz, wah, boosts, chorus, compressor, and vibe pedals with a purpose. Purchase online at bmffx.com or BMF Effects official shop on Reverb. Enhance your tone and playing experience today with BMF Effects, bmffx.com. Great tone made simple.
to Guitar Radio Show, the show dedicated to the guitar player, guitar maker, gear builder, and purveyors of such items that you may not know about, but should. Here's your host, Mark Davin.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Guitar Radio Show. You know, people, there's nothing like a musician that has chops for days and killer tone. We all dig that, right? We all dig that. But when they possess a deep, penetrating soul within every note they play, and it hits you that way, now you got something special. Well, we've got something truly special today, and he has all of those aforementioned qualities. And we're going to talk about his playing, his career, his latest release. It's called Rust Belt. Please welcome to Guitar Radio Show, Mr. Scott Sharrod. How are you, sir?
Hey, buddy. Thanks for having me, bro.
Hey, I'm so glad. I know that you are in transit right now to Woodstock, New York, one of my favorite places. Beautiful place.
Yeah, we're back and forth from New York City every week because my mother-in-law has a place up there, and we usually go up on the weekends and stuff and hang with her. But I'm going to pull over to a rest stop soon. By the way, I did pronounce my name incorrectly, and I totally forgive you because I have the most convoluted last name. It's actually pronounced Sherrard.
Sherrard.
Sherrard, but good for you because you didn't say Shepherd, which is very common. I don't know how people turn the two R's into two P's, but that's one that I get all the time. But, thank you for having me, and, I'm excited to have the chance to talk with you and talk about music.
Absolutely. One of the things that I notice about you is that you kind of walk the fence between these heart-driven songs that speak of America and these ridiculously cool, groove-oriented joints that you do. You really kind of embody American music. Is that just really just in you? Is that part of who you really are?
That's a big statement, man. Embody American music. I mean, I am an American. I'm a white American from basically a middle class background. I started out maybe lower middle class. From the Midwest, which is, kind of the subject of my new album, Rust Belt, of course. The title kind of gives it away. And really, the reason I did that, and in terms of like my background as an American, is like, my family is from Michigan, and that whenever you're from Michigan, it's always complicated, maybe more than any other place in the United States, except for the states of the American South. And I think Michigan, and particularly my friends from Memphis, like to call Detroit Memphis. I think a lot of that is because, we have so many of these Southern geniuses from Southern families, like from Smokey Robinson to Aretha Franklin, who were, went from the South to the North, and they ended up in Detroit. And of course, we have the blues movement that went from the South to the North and ended up in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to, my identity as an American, as a Midwestern American, is the sort of racial, socio-economic, and political struggles that manifest in this country, and particularly the way they would manifest in the region that I'm from, being the Rust Belt. And the reason I include the region is because my family moved a lot, and I ended up living in Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and going to high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, before I eventually moved to my adopted home in New York City. So, yeah, I mean, the melting pot of music, I like to call the music that I love American roots music, because I refuse to adhere to any specific genre, and I truly believe that it's all based in Saturday night and Sunday morning.
Yeah.
It's all the blues and gospel is where it all starts. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Hank Williams, or Marvin Gaye, or Jimi Hendrix, or Little Feat or the Allman Brothers, for that matter. It starts with the blues and gospel, and that, of course, brings you to a reckoning of African and Afro-Caribbean music, but also, Appalachian music, and all these different types of things merging. So the reason I'm excited to be an American artist is because it gives me kind of a passport to mix genres however I want, and I suppose more specifically they used to call what I do rock and roll. I think they call it now Americana, jam, blues rock. I don't know what they call it now, but they used to call it rock and roll, and that's where my heart is.
Right. Well, see, I think that's just the marketing companies always looking for a new angle on trying how to sell this music, you know. Often.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, rock and roll might even be canceled by the time this airs. I don't know.
Let's hope not. Jesus Christ. But no, yeah. I mean, growing up listening to listening to the Almonds or listening to Little Feat or listening to listening to Elvin Bishop. I didn't. I thought of it as rock and roll. It was all rock and roll to me. There was no. It was all. I mean, I knew where it came from. Right? I mean, what did Muddy Waters say? The blues had a baby and they called it rock and roll, right? So...
Well, I mean, you couldn't have any more credible source than that.
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
That's the father speaking there.
Right, exactly. So, it's interesting. I was looking at your bio and I got a little goofy with it. I said, wow, it's interesting. You were born the day that Freddie King died. And Freddie King is my favorite of the Kings. It's somehow
we've got that in common.
Yeah, it's just something about him. Every single stage of his career, and he had a storied career. It was really he had so many amazing chapters musically, and it was. But the fact that you were born on the day that he died, do you ever wonder about reincarnation?
Well, I would never, ever claim to have any part of even a pinky toe of the amount of talent that Freddie King had. But sometimes I like to think, when I'm having a tough time musically, I like to think that maybe I at least high-fived him on the way in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. That's really a great visual imprint.
Because I discovered his music very young. I was probably about 12 or so, or 13 or so when I started really digging into his stuff.
Yeah.
And like all of us, when we go from that gateway drug of rock and roll, although I did start, my first thing I learned on the guitar was the Jimmy Reed Shuffle, which was playing with my dad.
Right.
So and Chuck Berry was the other thing. Those were the first the intro to Oh Carol for lead guitar and the rhythm on Baby What You Want Me to Do.
Uh-huh.
So I had some heavy blues shit under my fingers right away. But there was something about Freddie's voice.
Yeah.
His style of guitar playing was very horn-like, and also he combined, I think, if my history is right, and it may or may not be, I think he was a little younger than B.B. and Albert, maybe by a couple years.
Yeah.
And I feel like his thing was kind of a combination of what they did, along with Freddie had I've been told before that he had a little period in Chicago when he was young. There's been rumors I've heard that he played the solo on Spoonful, and I played with Hubert Sumlin, and I never got a straight answer out of him about that when I was a teenager. I didn't really push him on it. But I know that Freddie, when he was making his first records in Ohio, Hideaway was something that Freddie reportedly nicked off of Earl Hooker, seeing Earl Hooker play sets in Chicago, and they'd play this tune to play the band off the stage, an instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently Freddie may have nicked that from Earl Hooker. These are all like rumors I've heard over the years from other musicians who were there at the time. But Freddie, I think, was, he's a Cuisinart of all those geniuses that he was around, but then he's also got this other factor, and when you get into, I'd send anybody to YouTube to watch Freddie King, because as a live performer, I think he's the top of the heap. He's just a volcano of soul.
Yeah.
It's just pouring everywhere around him, and the dynamics and the space in his playing is just profound. It's profound. The only equal I would say he has, and he's a little bit cooler, but definitely just as important to me, is Johnny Guitar Watson, another Texas blues man who had this evolution from being a straight blues guy to being like a funk soul blues guy.
Right.
They both had that journey, Freddie and Johnny. They both had that kind of journey, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And that was the thing that really grabbed me too. I mean, you know, it's like I said, all these chapters that Freddie had was this, you know, that those early things and the straight ahead blues and then into the 70s with the funk kind of soulful stuff. That's just really just captured me in a way that I just was like, wow, to blend these two worlds like this, you know, which really aren't that far away from each other at all, but to sew it all together like that was just captured me in a way that I had never been before. You know, it was just amazing. Yeah, he's definitely my favorite without a doubt. You mentioned that, you know, you're born in Michigan, obviously. You lived in Milwaukee, Pennsylvania, you mentioned, before going to New York. When I think of geography in a guitar player, how much did the geography and the places that you were at the times that you were, how much of that affected who you became? Or did it at all?
Well, that's a great and very pertinent question to where I'm at creatively and as a human being right now. So I was born in, as you mentioned, December 28th, 1976. So I'm 44 years old. You know, I've got two boys. I've got two little kids. I had a decade or so little less with Greg Allman, and now I'm playing in my other favorite band of all time, Little Feat. And then with the pandemic, you know, shutting down my entire live performing career, this album, the solo album I've been working on for the last 3 years on and off, it started to take a new shape where I started looking at the songs I was writing, and being the man I am at the time I am in my life, I was very reflective about my childhood. And there's even if people get a physical copy of this album, which people often don't these days, but if you do, when it comes out at the end of September, there's a photo montage that I made myself at the end that shows pictures of me, you know, shooting a .22 with my grandfather on Lake Michigan, and you know, then like going through to my first high school band in Pennsylvania, or it would have been freshman in high school band, and then going into my years playing with, you know, these guys who changed my life on the Chitlin circuit and at Milwaukee High School of the Arts in Milwaukee. You know, most of them who you've never heard of, like Stokes and Milwaukee Slim, Lee Gates, Willie Higgins, Harvey Scales is probably the most, you know, the only guy who had like a storied career out of any of those guys. But they shaped my whole life. There's pictures of them. So I'm really looking back and being reflective at this time, and I'd say it's just seismic, you know, the fact that I'm from Michigan. And as I mentioned early in our conversation today, you know, it kind of went there quickly, you know, that origin story of mine, something that's never left me. I mean, I've lived in New York City since I was 20, but at the same time, you know, those years, you know, from being born to being 20 years old, I mean, you're pretty much, you know, the die is pretty much cast at that point. You know, you're going to learn a lot, but in terms of who you are in your soul, and especially as a musician, the die was really cast really early for me. So I'd say it was integral to who I am. And also the fact, the age that I am, that I'm 44. I mean, growing up playing music in an analog world, I mean, it's the biggest advantage I have.
Yeah.
Having, you know, jamming and hanging with Hubert Sumlin, Pine Top Perkins, Mel Ryan, Buddy Miles, all those guys, and all those guys before I was 18 years old, where I was playing with them all the time and traveling with them and getting stories and lessons and gigs, and I mean, you know, and then having to go to record stores to find records, and then taping the records for people, and, you know, you'd sit with one record. You know, I used to have one cassette that I would make of one record that you couldn't find anywhere, that wasn't reissued on anything like Grant Green Alive or Donny Hathaway Live or Bobby Womack, you know, like all these different records we used to go find. Johnny Guitar Watson, you could only find like 3 of his records on CD, so you'd have to go find the vinyl. You go down to, you know, you go down to Chicago, you go to the Jazz Record Mart every time you can, when you got some money from a gig. That's what I used to do when I was 16, you know, and I would go in there and I was like creating this whole, you know, sort of library, this private library of these lost gems, and they became my life. And one album could be 2 months of my life. I mean, shit, Donny Hathaway Live, that was probably half a year of my life where I was only listening to maybe 2 other records. That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, you're
all those
right.
things I detailed, you know, going to the Up and Under, and you walk in, and there's these guys, and there's 10 people watching the jam session, and all these people, like Hubert comes through to have a free drink, and you as a 16-year-old can go up to the guy who fucking came up with, you know, all these riffs that changed, you know, Jimi Hendrix's life, and you can ask him how he came up with them in a bar. I mean, this doesn't happen anymore. I'm extremely fortunate for that aspect of my childhood. It's my ace in the hole every day.
Do you think that, and I thought about this when you were saying, because that really struck me. Do you think that because we no longer live in that analog world, that we won't see those type of, or have those type of experiences again?
No. I will say this. I believe, and I'm going to try to say this in as positive a way as I can. I think on your best day, if you're playing rock and roll or blues or any of these classic American music right now, it doesn't matter what it is, country, jazz, I think on your best day, you're Yo-Yo Ma. On your best day, you're not Bach, okay? It's just, we're in a post-Renaissance period of music right now in America.
Right.
Okay? So in terms of these styles, so if you're playing an electric guitar with period-correct PAFs and a tube amplifier with a guy playing a Hammond with a Leslie and a drummer and a bass player and some horn players, I mean, you know, you're basically the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. I mean, you're not Billie Eilish, you know, and I don't think it's any coincidence that, you know, when the best records come out these days that I love, usually it's like the Anderson .Paak Bruno Mars thing, and it's like they're in the clothes from the 70s. They're playing the music from the 70s. They're using the chord changes of the 70s. I think the shit is brilliant, and I love it to death, but it's like, that ain't Purple Haze, man, to us now. I mean, I think, honestly, if Jimi Hendrix was alive now, he'd be working at Google, you know, designing some kind of apps or some shit. I don't think he'd be playing guitar. I mean, you know, electric guitar would be like, you know, would have been like him picking up a cello back in the day instead of a guitar.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that too, because you know that you brought up the Bruno Mars thing, and when I heard all the tracks that they've released thus far from that, I was like, wow, these songs are great. But they
certainly are great songs.
They're great songs, and they're recorded well, and they're performed really well, but to me, they're snapshots of what was, and they're not, like you said, we're in this post Renaissance period. Are we going to have another Renaissance? And I mean, what will that be?
Well, I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. You got to get a 20-year-old on your show. I mean, I love Billie Eilish, okay? And that's what I wanted to mention earlier. I feel like she's an original artist who's great. I like Lord's stuff. I think there's a lot of really important voices like them, especially female voices now. You know, I love that Childish Gambino record that Donald Glover did. I feel like that was like that record, and it's basically an oldie at this point. It was a few years ago came out, Awaken My Love. I feel like that record is one of the most important records that's come out in the last 20 years. And it's got a throwback element to it. It certainly tips its hat to Sly Stone and Funkadelic and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's lyrical themes, and there are uses of technology and recording on that record that are very modern. And I love that. And that's why my new record, Rust Belt, you know, I did it with my producer-engineer, Charlie Martinez, and Charlie is always on the cutting edge of, like, what's going on with Pro Tools and Logic and plugins. And by the way, so are people like Mitchell Froom and Chad Blake, who are older than us. You know, there's a lot of records you're hearing now that you think are analog that are completely fucking digital.
Right.
And that's the Rust Belt album. I mean, we did it all in Logic and Pro Tools. I have a few guitar solos on that record that I did during the pandemic when the studio went out of business that we used, and I couldn't get in the studio. So I did them with plugins. And I'm going to tell you, man, I am like the most analog dude, and I've had great guitar players I've sent previews of the record to call me and ask me what mics and amps I'm using. And I'm literally just plugging my guitar into a fucking plugin. So, you know, the tools aren't really very important. It's more like what you hear, how you want to hear it, how you want to arrange it. And the biggest deal is like, what does the song need? That's
right.
The only thing that's important. What is going to make the song speak?
Right.
And, you know, I'm kind of old school in terms of like, I love a rhythm section. Like the one thing about Rust Belt I can tell you that I've done on every one of my records is the rhythm section was done completely live.
Mm-hmm.
And in my past records, even my last 3 solo albums, Saving Grace, Brickyard Band, Anti-Up, I mean, 90 to 100% of the lead vocal and the rhythm guitar are done live on all those albums.
That's
in other words, I didn't overdub the lead vocal.
Mm-hmm.
I did the rhythm section and the lead vocal live. This record was much more, you know, like I said, like piecing it together. So look, I mean, is there going to be another Prince? I mean, in our lifetimes? Probably not. I mean, we'd be lucky to get a Prince, let alone a Jimi Hendrix, you know, or a Miles Davis.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and if they do come along, man, I don't think you and I are going to be able to hear it.
See, that's the thing. Yeah. You're probably right. You're probably right, because we have this our own sort of fixation. Yeah, that's kind of a bummer.
It doesn't have to be. Look at Glenn Gould. I mean, that's one of my favorite sounds in the history of music.
Yeah.
Right? Go put on, you want to feel good about where rock and roll is at? Go put on, you know, Glenn Gould playing any Bach stuff. You know, go put on him doing, you know, any of these books, like Well-Tempered Clavier or, you know, Goldberg Variations, and listen to him swing the shit out of that music.
Yeah.
I mean, just put so much heart and soul and feel, and those are like top 10 records for me.
Yeah.
You know, they're right up there with the Beatles and Miles Davis and Hendrix and Little Feat and the Allman Brothers and all the stuff that I put in the top 10. You know, Glenn's right up there, man. And what's he doing? He's playing fucking ancient music, but he's putting his own twist on it.
Well, see, and that's
reinvents it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I felt when I first heard Chris Whitley. You know.
Oh man, you're touching my heart bringing up that name.
You know,
that's one of my heroes.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard him, I was like, wow, this isn't blues. This is something else. This is like Jack Kerouac meets Bob Dylan meets Muddy Waters meets Robert Johnson.
I'm so thrilled that you bring him up. I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast just about Chris Whitley with me.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a freshman in high school in Pennsylvania, and I was having a really, really, really tough time as a kid. I had a lot of hard knocks as a kid. And, you know, Living with the Law had just come out, and man, I was like, at the time, I hadn't come into my own yet, and I was very socially isolated in high school. And I'm sure everyone listening and you can relate to, like, how desperate that can feel. Mm-hmm. And that record for me was like probably what Billie Eilish is like for a teenage girl now, was Living with the Law. For me, it changed my fucking life.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to listen to it on cassette every day going to school, all day at school every day. And lucky for me, my parents took me to see him to the Trocadero in Philadelphia. We drove all the way to Philly, and I saw him live
cool.
right before I moved to Milwaukee when I was
cool.
about 14 or 15. And it changed my life, man. I mean, he became like him and Jeff Buckley Grace, which was a couple years after that.
Yeah.
Those guys are my modern, to this day. And I would add Paul Weller to that as well, his record Wildwood that came out a couple years like around Grace too. Those three guys were my modern heroes. They were my modern Lowell George, Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Dwayne Allman. They were my modern version of that because those were new records.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That's such a great way to contrast, to draw the line between. That totally makes sense. Did you get to see Chris at all in Manhattan?
No, I think he was. Certainly alive, but you know what? To be honest with you, like after Living with the Law, the next couple records, like Terra Incognito and those, it was like Din of Ecstasy. Like there would be like a couple songs that I would get super attached to.
Right.
But looking back on it, I'm really furious at myself because I abandoned him like everybody else did. and you know what? I was so fucking wrong because, when I got into making like my second record, Analog Monologue, and shit, Chris and I were ships passing because I was living in Manhattan. I was living in the East Village, eventually Brooklyn. I was recording in Cold Spring. We were ships passing with him going to make those later records.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, to be honest with you, it wasn't until Chris was sick, and then I didn't get a chance to see him, that I started really getting back in. And then I started getting back in to Din and to Dirt Floor and all the stuff, and I was going, oh my God.
Yeah.
He was doing it the whole time. It was almost like somebody who was into the Miles Davis Quintet.
Yeah.
And then he went to Bitches Brew, and you were like, all right.
Yeah.
And then like 20 years later, you go, fuck.
Yeah.
That was the shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I was still in New York. I was still in New York at that time, and I would see him at the Knitting Factory. Oh God, another place in the West Village. I can't remember the name of Village something. Village. I can't remember the name.
Gate?
Village Gate. Thank you. Very good. So I'm at the Village Gate the night that Bloomberg had passed the smoking ban in clubs.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah, of course.
He kept on lighting up between each song going, fucking Bloomberg.
Unbelievable.
But he would light up and he goes, you're not going to rat me out, right? And everybody was like, no, we're not going to rat you out. We laugh, and he smoked between each song. He was chain smoking like crazy.
Between those two mayors, between Giuliani, Giuliani now is like a...
Oh, let's not go there. Let's not even.
He's like a demonic. He's like a demonic cartoon now. But when you think about him doing the ban on dancing, and look, man, seriously, this is like some serious like Weimar Republic shit that he did when I moved to New York. Bloomberg, the smoking thing, that was actually great. I know for Chris it wasn't.
No, for Chris it was not.
Definitely an avid of, it killed him smoking, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing is that, that ban on dancing was much, much, much more detrimental to the city's culture. And also they used to bring sound meters into the clubs.
Yeah, oh yeah. They do that here in Austin. They do that here in Austin now.
Well, at least you can park in front of the club there.
It's absurd.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. But getting back to New York for you for a second, when you came to New York when you were 20, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So at 20 years old, you're still pretty impressionable. And I found living in New York, growing up in New York, the city, the pulse of the city, the energy of the city, it definitely infected and affected the way I played. Just like it did when I was living in the UK, when I was living in London, and now living here in Austin. That geography, did you find that New York made you, what did it do to your playing?
Well, it's in one word, jazz.
Yeah.
It's like in New York. Once you're on a gig, right? You get your first gig. Right when you're on your first gig, you realize that everybody in the band can play every style.
Right.
But the commonality as in all, let's say all American roots music is rooted in the blues for sure, right?
Right.
But in New York, it's more rooted in jazz than it is in blues.
Oh yeah.
And it's specifically more rooted in bebop jazz in particular. After all, bebop jazz was, invented in Harlem, arguably at Minton's Playhouse, which is about 5 blocks from where I live. People don't realize I think in general, realize how important my adopted home that I've lived in for 10 years of Harlem is to American music, because you got to realize Harlem is where Jimi Hendrix spent a couple years before he went to the UK, and he was playing with Cornell Dupree and King Curtis and all these guys when he was living in Harlem. He used to live about 20 blocks from where I live. Charlie Christian used to live in Harlem and play at Minton's about 5 blocks from where I live currently. And, arguably just the electric guitar alone, pretty much the electric guitar pretty much started with Charlie Christian and ended with Jimi Hendrix. And that was all, 2 Harlem residents, right?
Yeah.
Who really got all their education and training. So when you're talking about New York City, that's what you're really talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about a place where these 2 geniuses who basically invented and perfected the guitar were trained.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of wrapped up in it is like, and I'm telling you right now, when Jimi Hendrix was in New York City, he was playing on a King Curtis gig. He was playing jazz. He was playing blues. He was playing R&B. And that's what really informed the depth of his rock and roll music, And that's the thing about New York. It is a cultural Cuisinart, and it is a stylistically a musical Cuisinart. But the jazz thing, to me, was what, even though I went to High School of the Arts, which is a jazz school in Milwaukee, and I did do some gigs with Mel Ryan, who played organ on all those Wes Montgomery records. He was actually an adjunct professor at my high school, lucky me. It really came down to, like, when I was playing jazz in Milwaukee, it was like in the school ensemble, which was an amazing, like, 6-7 piece legit jazz ensemble. But, I was kind of the bad boy of the jazz program. I had long hair and I used to smoke unfiltered cigarettes, and, I would dress. You mentioned Jack Kerouac. I would dress like a beatnik because I was, like, obsessed with the beats. And all that stuff. And, like, but my thing was, like, I didn't want to be a jazz guy. Like, there were some people who were really into jazz at the high school, but the ones who were really into jazz were, like, fusion guys. And to me at that time, and I've actually grown to really love and appreciate this music, but at that time when somebody was into, like, Weather Report or Chick Corea or something, it was, like, absolutely the opposite of what I wanted to do with my entire life.
Right.
So, unfortunately, it made me kind of rebel against jazz in general. But when I got to New York and I had to figure out how to support myself, I remember doing, like, and you'll know all about this because, you have a background here. I remember, doing my first wedding gig so I could make, like, $500 in 4 hours, right?
Right.
And doing this, and this is when I'm in my very early 20s, like maybe I was 21 or 22. And, like, I got on the cocktail hour, right? And all the musicians were, like, older musicians. And these are all guys who, like, play with Rod Stewart and shit like that. They have, like, huge sideman gigs. So I was a little bit intimidated. I got on cocktail hour with, like, a pianist, and the bass player was playing upright. And they're literally calling, like, Chick Corea's Windows and, like, Wayne Shorter tunes. And, I got my fucking ass handed to me at this fucking cocktail party. And it's like the waiters are passing around shrimp trays and no one's paying any attention. And these guys are, like, playing the heaviest fucking jazz shit and playing the living shit out of it.
Right.
And I'm, like, left in the dust. And then I realized, okay, well, if I'm going to survive in New York and play the dance set at a wedding for 3 hours, I'm going to have to hang on this shit for an hour, or I'm not going to get called back.
Right.
So there's no, like, in New York, there's no distinguishing between, like, guys who play pop and guys who play blues
or people who play all these different genres. It's like when you're on these gigs, whether you're playing in a bar or you're playing at a wedding, you are expected to play every genre of music extremely at the highest level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the predicate.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I realized, well, if I'm going to live in New York, to make a living, I can't really be a specialist anymore. And I'd say honestly, it really fucked me up for a few years, to be honest with you, because it made me kind of lose my way, and it developed me as a musician much more in the long run. But I think until I hooked up with Greg Allman in 2008, when I met Greg, our first conversation took me straight back to being 18, playing at the Up and Under. And I re-found myself again. I was 30 years old at the time. When I was 30, I found myself again. And I became a specialist, and I came back to rock and roll. And I never looked back.
Yeah.
Because that was who I was before I came to New York. I was a rock and roller.
Right. But all those things had to happen for you to get to where you are. It had to go that way.
Yeah, and I'm extremely proud of all the records I've made. I mean, first with the Chesterfield Henry Street Soul, which, is something I'm extremely proud of. It was a very, very expensive and thorough effort that Sean Dixon and I made with that. Which that came out in 2000 or 2001. Going right through to I've got 6 solo albums now. I needed that experience in New York as a solo artist for sure.
Yeah.
As far as playing with Greg Allman and Little Feat, I gotta be honest with you, man. In terms of just playing the guitar and singing with Greg or with Little Feat, I could have done it just as well at 16 as I do it now.
Really?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it was such a part of your lexicon growing up?
I mean, it's my DNA, that music.
Yeah.
I grew up seeing it. I grew up seeing both those bands live from when I was about 10. I studied. I could play all the parts except for the piano on Waiting for Columbus.
Wow.
I learned when I was 11, 12. I'd have a 4-track cassette recorder, and I'd learn Richie's drum part, and then I'd learn Paul's guitar part, Kenny's bass line, Bull's slide, and I'd sing over it. I'd recreate the tracks, track by track, from Waiting for Columbus.
Yeah. See, that's what I got when I really started to sit down and listen to you and listen to all the things you've done. I said, wow, this is somebody, and I don't know if you subscribe to this idea or not, but I said, this is somebody who really has done the work and has done what we, quote unquote, the 10,000 hours. Do you feel like that's the case?
I mean, I'd say 10 is conservative. I'd go more with like 30,000. I'm one of the hardest workers you're ever going to talk to, and in music, because my approach is that if you don't have a song, don't turn on the equipment.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing to do is to pick the song, arrange the song, write the song, create the song. The interpreting is probably the 10,000 hours. The next 20,000 hours is having a reason to.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And I struggle with that every day.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
I mean, we all do. That's kind of the thing. Even when you're talking about, you want to talk about struggling. I mean, look at Chris Whitley. Look at all those sort of incredible, timeless to you and I as fans, songs he was writing with these albums that were selling 1,000 copies or something in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
How extraordinarily frustrating. And look, I mean, my career, I've been extremely blessed. I mean, the main thing in my life is to have my family. My wife, who I've been with for over 20 years, my kids, and I didn't, have to succumb to substance abuse the way Chris did. I mean, I certainly could have, still could, but it's like, I think I'd rather, I've definitely, my solo albums, I've never been signed to a record label, okay? I've never had an A&R person who could trick anybody into signing me. I've had plenty of major A&R people. I mean, Ahmet Ertegun was a fan of mine when I was 21. He tried to get me signed. Russ Titleman tried to get me signed, the legendary producer, a couple different times. I've had some pretty illustrious people, vice presidents and A&R people for record labels fight. But the boardroom never gave me the thumbs up, so I've made all my solo albums on my own. I mean, I've had financial investors, but I've never had a record label. And they've suffered commercially at an existential level, but I've made exactly the art I wanted to make. And one day when I spin off this fucking planet, I will be very, very proud for my kids to have these albums.
Yeah.
Because they are exactly what I wanted to say at the time I said them.
Yeah.
I can still put them on, and there's flaws. Humanity is about accepting flaws. But they are exactly what I wanted to say, the way I wanted to say it at that time. So I feel great about what Charlie Martinez, who's been with me for the entire ride as a producer and engineer, I feel great about what we've accomplished with the Scott Sherrard solo album. I feel an enormous sense of pride and accomplishment artistically. And I don't give a shit about the arts, about the art and commerce side of it. I only care about the artistic side of it for my solo work. And look, it's been a luxury for me because, I'm involved in education and American roots music, and that's helped pay the bills over the years. And honest with you, I've been extremely lucky that my heroes have somehow found me over and over again and asked me to be in their bands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's paid the bills.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a perfect segue, actually. Let's talk about Rust Belt, this record that's coming out end of September. I'm gonna jump around the record and ask you some questions. I really wish I had I could play the record for everyone in its entirety, so they could get the full picture. But you help us fill in the cracks. So the album opens with a track called "Bad News." To me, when I heard it, I was like, "Wow, this is how could you write the perfect opener for a record and a live set too?" It literally is the perfect opening for this record. What was that when you first penned it? Were you like, this is definitely going to be the opener for the record?
Well, thanks, man. We've been playing. That's probably the oldest song that I wrote on the record. I think I wrote it about 4 years ago, and it's been certainly with my band, with Brett Bass and Eric Cal, who are playing on that track, with Craig Dreyer on keys. But with Brett and Eric, we toured to support my Saving Grace album in 2018 as a trio. And I'll tell you what, man, we burned up the road with that band. We took a beating like a man over 40 should never take. And we played that song on every gig. We never played a gig where we didn't play it, and it just kept getting longer and longer. And when you come here and play that live, it can be 12 minutes long, 10 minutes long sometimes, with the ending.
Right.
So on Rust Belt, we did like a 5-minute-ish version of it, and did I think it was going to be the opening track? No. I wanted On the Run Again to be the first song. That's the second song now. But Charlie Martinez, my producer-engineer, convinced me this is what you have to open the album with. They're companion songs. Thematically, they're both about different kind of like Jekyll and Hyde disillusionment. Bad News is not as specific as On the Run Again. I'd say Bad News it's really about male toxicity. And it's not just about mine. It's kind of about male toxicity in general and being a man and trying to confront what that means.
Right.
And it's definitely, obviously, the negative side of it. I mean, it's in the title, right?
Right.
On the Run Again is more like kind of it's a story song. It's not just my story. I mean, it comes from an inspiration from my life. I wrote it when I was on tour in the Midwest, actually, with my trio. And it's really about trying to be a musician now. That's kind of how it started. And then it kind of turned into this whole, diatribe again about being a man right now. And it's like, how do you balance, being in a relationship and being someone who's passionate about what they do and taking the risks that are required for both simultaneously? How do you ask that much from a partner and from yourself and expect it to not all go off the rails?
Mm-hmm.
The whole album is about disillusionment and loss, and mourning is another theme that goes throughout the record.
Yeah, so particularly there's the track that really kind of like, I was like, whoa! It was deep on all fronts. It's lush musically and a lyrical story. The vocal is amazing. It's really cinematic. Is Michigan Sunset?
Yeah, and that's the second single from the album, so you can actually hear that one on Spotify now, as well as Bad News was the first single that you mentioned. Michigan Sunset, I did a 7-minute EPK with my friend, the director Scott Rosenbaum, that tells the whole story in detail. He put some beautiful visuals to an interview he did with me.
Is that on YouTube?
It is, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
You can look it up on YouTube or Vimeo. I think it's on both. We used it as a 7-part series on Instagram and Facebook too. We cut it into 7 segments, 7 1-minute segments. But so that's the most personal song I've ever written. It's probably the most important song I've ever written for me. Certainly the most. I think most people would think I would say My Only True Friend, but My Only True Friend is the most important song I've written for the public, and that I wrote for and with a friend, being Greg Allman. But Michigan Sunset is really, this whole album is for me. It's not for anyone else. I did this album for me. This was the bloodletting. It was a bloodletting for me that I needed. And now I get to share it with everyone, and it gets to be yours. But it started as being mine. And Scott Smith was a guy that I'm named after, and he was the singer in my dad's rock and roll band in Detroit area in Michigan in the 60s. He was drafted in 69. He tried to not go as a conscientious objector, but they made him serve. He decided to serve as a combat medic because he refused to kill anyone on principle. And he was actually tragically killed the day before he was supposed to come back home after serving a torturous tour of duty as a combat medic in the fields. And he bled to death on the battlefield after taking a wound trying to save another soldier. And he was my parents' best friend, and he was a great singer and the singer of my dad's band, and he was killed at 19 in a war that made no fucking sense, which is something we can all think about right now all over again with Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And, ironically, we released this single on the day that the pullout started, which was definitely not coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think Scott's story came through me one day, and I sat down and wrote the skeleton of the song in probably about 10 minutes. And it was shit. I didn't think I was going to write this song, and now I've got to write it. And I ended up playing this song in a very early form for a really brilliant and legendary songwriter from Nashville originally from Texas, but he's been in Nashville for many years, named Gary Nicholson. And Gary is like one of my favorite songwriters, and he's a songwriter, okay? This is like me, this is like me showing a guitar solo to Pat Metheny or something. Okay? somebody who's going to look right through it and just be like, dude, come on. And, Gary doesn't pull any punches. He's also a Texan, so he's going to get right up your face and tell you what's going on. Gary, I should also mention, you brought up Freddie King. Gary's high school band used to back up Freddie at dances and stuff.
Wow.
So, deep character. And I played this song for Gary, and I showed him the lyrics. And basically what he said to me was, he had some little notes about things that he would change and some advice. And he said to me, Scott, I'm not going to help you write this song. And he goes, whatever you do, don't ever let anyone else sing this song. This is your song. And when he said that to me, I said, all right, I got to take a page from, I was reading Robbie Robertson's biography at the time. And interesting thing was like that line, cold in my blood. That's something my grandfather used to say. It's from Michigan. And my people came from Canada, where Robbie's people are from. So this all works into that Rust Belt thing, right? It's like I grew up across the water from where Robbie came from. A 10-minute drive, from where I lived in Dearborn to where Robbie was from. And he was cold in my blood in that song, in Acadian Driftwood. And I realized that, all those things were coming together, and I thought about, well, how did Robbie write songs like Acadian Driftwood? And then I read in Robbie's biography how he talked about doing historical research to contextually understand his own people. Because his people in the Acadian Driftwood were the people who, came up from New Orleans and ended up in Canada, okay? And my people came from Canada and ended up in Michigan.
Right.
Ships passing, right?
Yeah.
So I decided to research the Vietnam War. And that's where I came up with the first verse of the song. I changed the first verse. 1st of December in 69. Uncle Sam called on number 1. All right, so that was me changing the lyrics based on historical fact. And the song became not only a dedication to Scott Smith, but I started going beyond that, thinking about people like Gore Vidal, authors of like historical fiction. And I started to think, well, if Gore Vidal can write about Lincoln and basically turn it into a novel, I can write about Scott and use historical fact to tell his story, and then some alliteration to turn it into a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the story of writing that song. It became a huge project. And I've never written a song like that in my life.
It's a mini movie. Do you know what I mean?
And I was listening to a lot of Warren Zevon when I was making this record, who I used to play Warren songs with my dad when I was a kid, and he's one of my biggest influences. And I was thinking about, now this is a little bit more tongue-in-cheek song, but Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner.
Uh-huh.
So I'd say Michigan Sunset, if I had to pick 2 songs, it's Acadian Driftwood meets Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner.
Uh-huh. I can see that.
That's where it is in terms of the musical arrangement.
Yeah.
With a touch of maybe the ballad side of the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Yeah, it's incredibly visual. It's incredibly visual. I mean, it was a perfect. You know how sometimes you get, oh wow, it's a great lyric, but the music is okay, or oh my God, that's amazing music, but the lyric is just okay. This is where you had Kismet. Everything fired on all cylinders for this song.
Thanks, man. It took me 3 years to write that song. It took me 3 years to write My Only True Friend with Greg Allman too.
Wow.
I've learned some real lessons in the last 10 years or so, interacting with people like Bill Payne from Little Feat and Greg Allman and Levon Helm. A number of years ago, I mean, with Levon, it was like 10, 11 years ago. Interacting with these guys in sessions and on gigs, and understanding what it takes to get there. Another thing that happened a lot on this record, and this was influenced we'll go back to Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm, who I played with a number of times at his barn in Woodstock and recorded with him as well, is the whole concept of like halftime, double time for feels for songs.
Right.
And Michigan Sunset was always going to be slow, but there's another song called Anne Marie where it was slow for years, and I recorded it twice, and then I went back and I actually recorded the finished version in double time. There was a lot of stuff like that on this record where I would put my money where my mouth was, and I re-recorded this album twice, half of it. So this album, Rust Belt, was extreme. I'd say half of it was kind of flying off the cuff and then fixed later a little bit, and the other half was like labored over, like I've never labored over songs and recordings in my life, because again, this record was to document people and relationships that matter to me. Songs for my wife, songs for my grandmother-in-law, a song for Scott Smith, the man I'm named after, songs about mourning for people like Greg Allman.
Yeah.
It's like, this record was like, I was not gonna fucking stop until it was right. And I'm gonna tell you, the record is right. I've listened to it all the way through about 5 or 6 times in the last couple weeks since we finished mastering it and everything. And I can just not tell you how good it feels to have done this. I'm
great.
so proud of this.
That's great. That's great. The title track and the reprise, I really dig the idea that you did the reprise in there and all. This is such a killer track. I just love the vibe of it. It at points it almost kind of borders on like a psychedelia. It's super cool. It reminds me of, on Electric Ladyland when Jimmy had Rainy Day, Dream Away, and then had Still Rainin', Still Dreamin'.
That's basically the inspiration for doing it twice.
Oh, okay, cool. I didn't realize that. But that's what it kind of.
You nailed it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, that's what it reminded me of.
And then I'll also add the other inspiration for doing it was the Paul Weller album Wild Wood, which is one of my biggest influences. And every record I've made, I have referenced the artists I talked to you about earlier. Jeff Buckley, Grace, Chris Whitley, Living with the Law, and Paul Weller, Wild Wood. Also, I would add Los Lobos, Colossal Head, and This Time. And those records, every record I've made with Charlie, we talk about, and Latin Playboys, we talk about those records every time we make a record.
Yeah.
So, on Wildwood by Paul Weller, he has an instrumental track, I think it's called Brand New Day or something like that comes in and out of the record, and it plays about a minute or two at a time. What we did with Rust Belt, the title track Rust Belt is, so I was in the studio with Eric Calvin, Brett Bass, my band, and bass player and drummer, and I said to them, look, I've got this chord progression, I've got an idea for a groove, and Brett and Cal have a very specific way of playing together, as most of the great rhythm sections do. Cal in particular is kind of the master of that, I guess you could call it that James Gadsden style 16th note hi-hat thing that we know from like all the stuff Gadsden did with like, Express Yourself, and then with Bill Withers later. Cal is like the modern master of that groove. And I asked Cal to do his version of that 16th note groove with these kind of, minor 9 sus chords. I was also thinking about Marvin Gaye, who used to do tracks like this. On Here, My Dear, there's a track that comes back over and over. Yeah. That's another one.
Yeah.
So I said, guys, just do me a favor. Let's just play this for like 5 minutes, and then Charlie Martinez and I are going to do something with it later. I don't know what we're going to do with it. One take, played for 5 minutes, 1 3-chord progression, tucked it away and forgot about it.
Right.
During the pandemic, I started sending the track around to musicians. So I sent it to Justin Schipper, who did all that really innovative, incredible pedal steel work all over the record.
Yeah.
And I had Justin do a baritone guitar and a pedal steel, and I said, improvise, go nuts, do your whole psychedelic pedal steel thing. That became Rust Belt. And then that went on for about 4 minutes. And then we had Charlie Martinez made a drum loop out of what Eric Cal played, and then he did all his crazy shit that he does with plugins to the drum loop. It's all a very modern approach.
Yeah.
Then you'll hear a transitional moment on the first one where we go to the end of Rising Tide, which is the next song on the record,
right.
and you'll hear my friend Brian Charette play this Rhodes piano solo that sounds like something you would have heard off a Zawinul record or something. That moment on the Rust Belt track is, conceptually, I was trying to get you from, that's me driving from the Midwest to New York City in 1996.
Okay.
So you're going from the Midwest, where you've got that track with the pedal steel and the baritone and this kind of like open fields and like wide open, you know, kind of like moody disillusionment, and then it kicks over to this kind of really modern sort of jazz chaotic thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you.
Pretty conceptual.
I was going to ask you actually on Rising Tide that the fuzzed out soloing that you're doing. It's all kind of fuzzed out. Are you? Is that a plugin or is that a box? What are you using there?
All right. Well, I'm glad you asked, and this is why liner notes were always so important. But so there's a friend of mine who's literally one of the best guitar players on earth. His name is Dan Littleton. He lives in Woodstock. Your listeners might know him from his work with Amy Helm. He also has a band with his wife, Elizabeth Mitchell, and they're one of the best kids' music bands around, actually. They did some records with Dan Zanes, and they're very known in that world. Were made as Dan Littleton and Elizabeth Mitchell. But Dan is one of the most important guitar players of this era. And he lives in Woodstock, and not enough people know about him. And I asked him to play on my record, and Dan is the only guitar player who's ever played on a Scott Sherrard album. Besides, I had my friend Connor Kennedy played on one song on the Brickyard Band album, but that's about it. And Dan plays some Telecaster on a few tunes on Rust Belt. And what you're listening to on Rising Tide is when you get to the end, I went to Dan's studio in Woodstock, and we plugged some guitars right into some old amplifiers, and we faced each other, and we played a live guitar exchange over the track.
Ah.
So this guitar on one side is Dan, and the second guitar that's a little bit cleaner is me. And that whole thing is one take, unedited, and the only thing that's edited is we actually faded out at the end because we kept going. But when the band track ends, we kept playing, and we have a completely improvised chordal thing that I do that he plays over that ends the track.
That's super cool. It really captured my ear. I was like, wow, what's going on here? This is so cool. What a great.
You want to know what I was thinking about with Rising Tide? I really love that song. I'm very proud of that song and that track. That track, I had a very specific mission with that track. And the mission was to get Dan Littleton to play a guitar solo with me and to do a rhythm track that perfectly combined the vibes of Funkadelic and Pink Floyd. I wanted to make a record on that track that sounded like Funkadelic and Pink Floyd went to the studio together and made a song.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we were going for with that. And I feel like we got pretty damn close to what that might sound like with how that whole thing is arranged.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that track. We had a lot of fun making it. And, you know, like I said, Dan he's really important because he always plays the song. He always serves the song, but that guy never, ever, ever plays a cliche. It's stunning. His phrasing is just everything about the guy, his tone, he's just so inspiring, and I love him as a person, and I can't say enough good things. It was an honor to have him on the record, to be totally honest with you.
That's cool. That's great. Another track that really kind of stood out, and it's a pretty straight ahead track, is Too Many Losers. I love the jazzy blues aspect, but you've got this Freddie King tone on the guitar. Do you think that's a Freddie King tone? I think it's a Freddie King tone.
Well, this is a question of, since we're doing a talk show, I'll talk about it. But it's like sometimes it's better not to know how they make the souffle. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not. Don't you don't have to share any secrets if you don't want. I'm just saying it's real.
No, I'm gonna tell you all of them.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you all of them. That's what's fun about these podcasts. So that song, it's obviously about Trump, right? It's got to be obvious, right? So it's about Trump and everybody who surrounds him, and every crooked ass politician, and every crooked ass motherfucker boss at your job, and teacher who is an asshole who made things hard for you, and there's just always these fucking creeps. Harvey Weinstein, it's just too many fucking losers are winners in this world.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote the song. And it just, during the last few years in America, it was just like an endless fucking parade of beatings with these motherfuckers. And all of these motherfuckers. And that frustration led to me writing the song. And I wanted to I've written a lot of blues-based rock and roll songs because I think it's the most pure form of rock and roll, to be honest with you.
Right.
Peg by Steely Dan is a fucking blues.
Yeah.
When you think about the most sophisticated rock songs, they're usually blues songs. So I kind of took the medium and I got one of my biggest inspirations vocally is Johnny Taylor. And I started getting that cheaper to keeper. Do you know that song?
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I started to get that Bobby Bland, Johnny Taylor thing in my head, and I thought, what? I don't want to make this an angry rock song. I don't want to make this an angry funk song. I'm gonna keep it cool. I want the band to be cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get mad over that. And I like that kind of contrast in music.
Yeah, because
I like it when you get contrast.
Yeah, because at first blush, when you hear it, you're not, unless you're really sitting there and listening to the lyrics. But if you're just listening to the music, it's like, wow, this is very, very tight, very cool, very smooth. And then you go back and listen to it again, because I've listened to the record now 5 or 6 times. You go ahead and you go, oh, okay, all right. I see what's going on here.
I think I did a good job pacing the verses on that song, because when you get to the third verse, it really, after those and the guitar solos kind of smack you around, the third verse really drives it home. Where is it safe in today's endless game when your health is a business and the schools are a shame?
Yeah.
And everywhere you go, some madman could be packing heat. We've gambled it away, resigned in defeat. Too many saints are turning into sinners. Too many losers are coming up winners.
Right.
I had something up right there.
Yep.
But the thing is like we give it some time before we start getting specific, and I like the pacing, but the guitar solo on that song, that's a plug-in. There's no amplifiers.
Oh,
there's
wow.
no microphones. And let me plug the plug-in. It's called Scuff on the Amps. It's about $150, and I use the Brown Deluxe setting, and I set up 2 of them, and I use ribbon mic settings, and I pull the mics in certain positions, and I use the G1265 Celestion speaker cabinets that I use in real life. And I do put a Strymon reverb unit, pedal, and an Origin Effects Revival drive for distortion in front, which is kind of cheating, because those two pedals do a remarkable amount to a guitar signal.
Yeah.
And then the guitar on that song and that song only for the solo is a B&G guitar. And they're out of Israel, and they sent me we're trying to come up with
You there?
Okay. It's fully, it's not fully hollow, but it's like, it's not semi-hollow either. It's got a block, but not much of a block, so it's really resonant. And it has these loud, super microphonic P90s that they wound over there. And it's pretty aggressive guitar sound on that song.
Yeah, no, it's killer. It was a standout for sure. Absolutely. Another one that I really dug with a New Orleans kind of a vibe was Ain't Gonna Worry. You there?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. I'm in the bad cell area for about 1 minute here.
Okay.
We'll be good.
Another track that I really dug was that New Orleans tip kind of thing they had called I Ain't Gonna Worry.
All right, so it could be New Orleans, but it's not. So that is a cover. It was written by a singer, songwriter, producer, arranger named Tommy Tate. And your listeners probably don't know Tommy Tate. I mean, shit, I didn't know who Tommy Tate was until I was on tour in Ferrara, Italy with Carla Thomas. And I was on a package tour doing my show with a house band. And I was opening for Carla, and we ended up singing Tramp a couple times together, which is one of the greatest thrills of my entire life, was getting to stand in for Otis Redding with Carla Thomas. Carla and her sister Van Eves, who is on tour with us and is another great singer, one night we were out to dinner in Ferrara, and they started talking about this cat Tommy Tate. And I said, "Who's Tommy Tate?" And they go, "Oh no." It was one of those moments. It used to happen to me a lot when I was a teenager with the older cats, you know. And I was like, "Oh shit, take me down the rabbit hole." So I ended up finding out that this guy Vasti Jackson was out playing guitar with us. Great guitar player. He was actually Johnny Taylor's MD and played on Johnny's records on Malico. So I was talking to Vasti one night, and I said, "Yo, what about Tommy Tate?" And he goes, "Man, Tommy Tate," he's like, "Tommy Tate was a genius. He's from Mississippi, and he was one of the arrangers and writers for Malico, for Bobby Bland, ZZ Hill, you know, all those 70s Malico records." And he told me, he's like, you gotta check out his stuff on Coco, the Coco label. So lucky for me, next day, dial up on Apple Music, there it is, Tommy Tate, Coco Records. So Tommy, his first swipe at being a solo artist, he actually went to Muscle Shoals and recorded at a studio, not with the Swampers, not at Fame, not Muscle Shoals Sound,
right,
with some unanimous group of cats. I don't know who they were. I can't figure it out. And man, I tell you what, this was like late 60s. This cat was the most singing, playing, writing, arranging motherfucker. I mean, he's right up there with Donny Hathaway and all the cats, man. I mean, just have the whole package. And I Ain't Gonna Worry is one of the songs from that Coco compilation I got. And I encourage anybody, you know, go get that. Go get it up on your streaming platform. Go listen to that Tommy Tate Coco Sessions and listen to his version of I Ain't Gonna Worry. It's just tear your throat out. That shit is funky as hell.
That's a killer tune.
Thanks, man. Tommy was a great writer. He was a great singer and a great player.
That's cool. So I was looking
He was a pianist.
I was looking at the Little Feat website, and I see that there's gigs coming up.
you know, the Delta variant, it ain't going to get us forever, probably. So, we do have a Northeast tour. We will be touring the Believer municipalities. So, I have a good feeling that it's going to happen. You know, we've got a lot of gigs next year.
Yeah.
So pray for us and pray for this country. And, you know, I can tell you in 2022, Little Feat's going to play a lot of shows. And they are going to be very, very exciting shows without me giving up the ghost.
Yeah.
But there's going to be some themes. There's going to be some special guests. There's going to be a huge, huge celebration of the Little Feat legacy coming your way.
I can't wait, man. That's another one of those guitar players. When he passed away, I was just completely devastated. Lowell was on such a different level, on such a different plane of approach and intention. That's the thing. It was Lowell's intention towards music and towards the instrument was completely different than anything I had ever heard in my life. It was just so fascinating. I think it must be...
But with Lowell, you know, for me as a kid, like a white Midwestern kid, when I heard my first Little Feat record, which was Waiting for Columbus and Sailing Shoes both, because my dad used to play Easy to Slip and stuff. I used to play Willin' and Easy to Slip with him. But then when I saw a picture of Lowell George, I was a fat, white, middle-class kid, okay, in the Midwest. And when I heard Lowell and then I saw Lowell, it was very different than when I heard and saw Jimi Hendrix, right?
Yeah.
When I heard and saw Jimi Hendrix, I said, this is the greatest artist of all time. I'm fucked. When I heard and saw Lowell George, I said, wait a second. This is one of the greatest artists of all time, and he looks like me. I might be able to do something with my life with this.
Yeah.
You know, he was like, he was kind of, you know, for me, he became very personal. And when you get into the catalog and you get into songs that I discovered as a child, I was a child. When you get into songs like Trouble, and you get into songs like Heartache, and you get into songs like Long Distance Love, I mean, that guy reached right into my fucking soul, man, when I was a child. Yeah. And then I saw Little Feat on the Let It Roll tour a number of times, and they just saw him with Richie, and they just became, along with the Allman Brothers, I had the same feeling with the Allman Brothers, you know. But the thing was, when I heard and saw Greg, it was different because, you know, I used to joke with him about this. I mean, Greg was like a matinee idol, you know. And he was like this super handsome, blonde, you know, god. You know, Lowell was not that. You know, Greg wasn't doing songs like Trouble. Greg wasn't doing songs like with those kind of lyrics and those kind of, you know, those kind of gonzo. You know, they're like a gonzo rock band, Little Feat. I mean, they kind of made what Frank Zappa was doing cool and bluesy. You know, they had this intellectual Hunter S. Thompson edge. Right. And that was what I was into also. I was into Mad Magazine. I was into Hunter S. Thompson and Kurt Vonnegut just as much because I was into Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Duke Ellington and Count Basie when I was 12. And they were the band. Little Feat was the band. You know, they pulled that all together. They pulled that whole milieu of being who I was into a sound and a style. And they reached out to you and they said, their music said to me, you know, shit, man, follow your dream, you know.
Well, I mean, to think about it. A band that can do a song like Willin', and also do a song like, you know, Time Loves a Hero. I mean, opposite ends of the spectrum. and it was all the same, and it was all
very different writers too.
Yeah, but all the same band, and it made sense. Once again, melting pot, right? That's
and also with you got these bands, and I tell you, man, it's still my dream. I'm going to tell you right now, this Scott Sherrod solo album that you have in your possession is the last Scott Sherrod solo album that's going to be released as an album for sure, because I am in Little Feat as a band member, and I am one of the lead singers and writers for Little Feat now.
right.
And I'm putting my entire being into this band because I love these guys, and I love their music, and I love them all as people. And I think with Tony Leone now on drums too, I think we're going to be doing extraordinary things for you guys and for each other. But I want to be in a band before I die.
Yeah.
And besides being in Little Feat, you know, I also want to have a side project where I'm in a band, because that's where I'm happiest. The Greg Allman Band was a band.
Yeah.
I mean, Greg was the boss on the books,
Right.
but he ran the band like it was a band. It was a democracy. And that's the only kind of bands I can be in. I'm not good at being a side man. I'm shit at it. And as a solo artist, I think I excel in the studio. I feel like I've had it told to me by a lot of different producers and musicians from the 60s and 70s that if I had a career in the 60s and 70s, my albums would have been well received by artists, certainly. But my favorite music in rock and roll, when it comes to the music that came after the founders, is Little Feat, the band, the Allman Brothers, NRBQ, Los Lobos. Those are the best acts. And what is the common thread? The sum, you know, is not greater than the individual. They're all great writers, they're all great singers, they're all great arrangers, they're all great producers. All boats rise. So that's, I hope that besides doing this with my heroes, the guys who happen to be the age of my father now, I'm trying to learn everything I can from them. But besides that, I think in rock and roll, in jazz, in blues, whatever American roots music style, we got to find a way back to that, man.
Yeah.
And I'm all about it. The reason I love being in Little Feat, besides the honor of it, is it's a democracy, man. It's like, hey, man, you sing this song. You know, that's great. Play this solo. That's great. Now you sing. And I'm like excited that Tony Leone can sing a song or two. You know, I'm excited to listen to Bill sing. I'm excited to listen to Fred sing, Sam. I'm excited about sharing the spotlight. It is truly inspiring to do that. That is the spirit of my music. I tried to do that with a group called the Brickyard Band. If your listeners can find a record, it ended up becoming a solo album because I couldn't get everybody on the same fucking page, because everybody's a fucking mercenary now. But I'll tell you what, that band that I did, the Brickyard Band in New York, that was a band. And my model was Little Feat for that band. I told them all, I said, we're going to do a version of what Little Feat did. And really it's centered around Moses Petru being one of my favorite singer, songwriter, drummer, keyboard players. And I encourage your listeners to check that record out as well, because I feel like it's a very important album. And it became a solo record because I was the only guy who was booking the gigs and doing the email list and doing anything really. Everybody else just wanted to show up and get paid.
Right.
You know, I was paying to put ads out, paying for Facebook ads, and paying for people, for publicists and all this shit. It wasn't an all-in situation. But musically, on that one record, I think we captured some of the idea of how a band should work. But that's my next project, it'll be a side project for now while we get Little Feat up and running. That's my main artistic focus, probably for the next 4 or 5 years or beyond. We'll see how we do. but I would really like to be in a real band of singer-songwriters before I spin off the earth.
Yeah.
You know, that's my dream. I'm done with the solo thing. It's agony, to be honest with you. The only part of being a solo artist that I adore, and I mean adore, is making records with Charlie Martinez.
Right.
It's making records with Charlie Martinez is my favorite consistent artistic act of my life. He's just an amazing collaborator, and it's such a sandbox to climb into every time. And I love recording. I love making albums. It is my favorite medium. Promoting an album, doing all the work that goes into it, and hey guys, it's Scott on TikTok. Will you please come to my show? It's agony, bro. I'm just gonna be straight up with you.
Yeah.
It's fucking agony. When you do that with a band, though, it's not.
Yeah.
Like doing promotional shit with Little Feat is fun as hell. It's because you're kind of all in it together, and you can all joke about it. You can conceive ways to do it. When you're a solo artist and your band is like, how much does the gig pay and where is it? And and everybody's got their hand out, and you're like employing everybody, and you're like trying to connect with people online. It's murder on your soul, bro. It's murder.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about the whole Little Feat thing because, it was kind of when Paul passed away, it was kind of like up in the air, like, okay, what's going to happen now? So,
I can tell you, in the Little Feat camp, it wasn't up in the air because my first gig, I set up at my first sound check in November of 2019 to meet everybody for the first time.
Right.
In Little Feat. And I got a phone call from my friend Jake, who plays sax in the horn section. He says, Scott, we're driving over to the gig. We just found out that Paul Barrere died. So my first time meeting everybody was to say, I'm sorry about your friend. Can we run a couple songs before the show?
Holy shit.
No rehearsals.
Jesus.
Okay? And I had a book of 30 songs that I had to learn, and I was singing a number of songs too, singing about a half dozen tunes on the gig originally.
Damn.
And we went on stage, and Bill Payne grabbed the mic, and he said, in a packed house, he goes, ladies and gentlemen, we've lost our friend Paul Barrere. And then we played the first song of the show. And at the end of the gig, it was one of the most profound moments of my life. I mean, I played Greg Allman's last show with him in Atlanta, Georgia, in the band shell on the anniversary of Dwayne Allman's death.
Oh my goodness.
Was Greg Allman's last show. I played that show. I played Levon Helm's last show with him as his guitarist in his barn with Los Lobos as the opening act and the special guest on the set. And I left Levon in what would become essentially his deathbed with Los Lobos around him. Okay? So when I came into this moment with my heroes in Little Feat and losing one of my heroes, Paul, and them losing their friend, I had a lot of ammunition. I had a lot of emotional work that I had done around this process with music and how to go into sort of a shamanistic communal headspace.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing that you were actually. It was amazing that you were actually able to do that, because some people would just kind of fold like a card table, in this situation.
I drove right into it, and I remembered Greg losing his voice halfway through the last gig and not understanding why. I remembered Levon's dentures falling out of his mouth onto the snare drum because his spine was in so much pain that his spine was in so much pain and full of cancer that he clamped his jaw and had it fall onto the drum set, and he grabbed the dentures and threw them back into his mouth and grabbed his sticks and kept playing a fucking 2.5-hour show.
Wow.
And I thought about what it means to play this music to those guys, okay? And I looked in their eyes, and I knew what was going on. Greg was family to me. And I'd say, I was definitely not. I played with Levon a handful of times, but I'm friends with his daughter Amy, and everybody in the band are good friends of mine, and I'm part of the family. And I looked at them and I said, we're gonna do this.
Yeah.
And they were like, fuck yeah, we're gonna do this. And we got out there and we played that show with Little Feat. And I got to the end of the gig and we were gonna do a bow together. And before the band came to the front of the stage, Bill Payne walked all the way across the stage to me. And he shook my hand in front of the fans. And he said, motherfucker, you know our music. And for me, that was one of the most important moments of my musical life. Because to play that show, get an ovation from the fans, nobody left. I was like, is everybody going to leave? Like, what's going to happen? And then have Bill do that in front of the fans, in front of the band, and take a bow together. And when I went back in the dressing room at the end of the gig, we just knew. I mean, the management at the time didn't want it to happen. I don't think they wanted me in the band. But the band knew.
Yeah.
At the end of that show, they came up to me and they looked at me. They hugged me and they shook my hand and they said, yeah, man, we're going to play a lot together.
That's great.
This is it. So, talking about, high-fiving Freddie on the way out of the womb. And, at birth, I was lost for a day. They gave my mom the wrong baby.
For real?
And, yeah. And my mom smelled me and she said, this is not my baby. And she argued with the nurses for a long time. And eventually I was found in the corner of the nursery and they brought her the correct baby.
Oh my God.
My parents were told by several doctors that they would never have a child. Okay? And when I was born, it was completely against all science. The doctors could not explain how my mom became pregnant. And after I was born, I'm an only child, they were never able to conceive again. And they tried. But that's kind of literally from when I was born, man. This is how my whole life has been, is these really cosmically fucked up intersections. And I'm not saying, some people have trouble with purpose in life. I've never had I've had a lot of trouble in life. A lot. But I have never had trouble with purpose because I've been thrust from the fucking moment that I came out of the womb with so many left field, as we all do. But mine became very musically oriented towards my idols consistently. And when I got to this occasion with Little Feat, it was just kismet. It's like, if there's any argument for things all lining up correctly in my life as a musician, it was that particular moment. Because if it hadn't have been for all the guidance I had, going right through to Greg, being the most significant, profound. I've talked about this a lot in interviews, but right before I went on and did that gig with Little Feat, and before Bill was going to announce to the fans that Paul had passed away, they didn't know. It hadn't been announced publicly. That nobody could have looked it up on their phone at that point even. I said, I had a moment with myself before I went on stage, before I huddled with the band. And I sat in a room and I talked to Greg for 2 minutes. Greg was best friends with Lowell George. They were really tight. And I said, Greg, I don't know if you're having a beer with Lowell right now because you both can at this point. But if you've got anything to give me, man, if there's any fucking afterlife, like if you're gonna show me a sign that you're with us, this is it. I gotta go out there and sing, I gotta go out there and sing "Rocket in My Pocket." I gotta go out there and sing "All That You Dream." Gotta help me out, bro. And I don't know, man. It's hard. I'm not a religious person. I guess I'm sort of a spiritualish person. But music is energy. And I think that human bodies and souls are energy. And when you move energy and all this shit goes on as together, and you got a whole group of humans that love that music in one room, stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It just all came. And as musicians, as kind of these kind of shamanistic people, we knew after the gig that we had bonded. We knew that something had happened. And the business people and everybody else involved who had other agendas, they couldn't even come close to touching that particular moment. And that's the spirit behind Little Feat right now. And I'll tell you something, man, when that happens with a group of people, and we have a profoundly talented team of business people now, profoundly great management, road manager, manager, sound team. My producer engineer of over 20 years, Charlie Martinez, who I've referenced many times in this call, is now doing front of house and recording work for Little Feat.
Oh, cool.
So these families are coming together.
Yeah.
And profound shit happens out of that. And I think that there's going to be a profoundly cool chapter for Little Feat. I'm hoping that we can kind of get another let it roll type situation going on for the band.
Yeah.
Where Lowell's not coming back. Paul, Richie, they're not coming back. But you know what, man? These guys, Fred, Kenny, Sam, Bill, they're just as important. And they're with us, and they're playing their fucking asses off.
Yeah.
So let's go. And for Tony and I, as the new guys, I mean, there's no band that's more important for either of us. So we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna do something. We're gonna do something good, and it's gonna feel good for us, and hopefully it's gonna feel good for everybody. And that's inspiration, man. I mean, that's especially through this pandemic when we're all trying to figure out with live music. I mean, we've been saying, we were supposed to get together in September, and we couldn't because Tennessee couldn't get their shit together.
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to do something in Nashville, and their numbers suck. So it's too risky for us on a number of levels to do it.
Yeah.
But we're going to do it.
I'm excited. I can't wait. I'm really, really super. I'm such a Little Feat fan, and I'm super excited, and I think it's such a great matching between you and them. It just makes sense.
I'm really happy to hear you say that, man. I mean, the fans have been unbelievably supportive, and I got to tell you, my band, the Greg Allman Band, the breadbasket was always the Eastern Seaboard, and particularly the Northeast. And it was funny because the 7 gigs I did with Little Feat before the lockdown, it's amazing. Like, I saw all these people at the meet and greets who were the same people that I saw with Greg and with my band.
Right.
And you start to realize, like, it's tribe. It's the Allman Brothers and Little Feat are inseparable for me, and they're families, And there's a big intertwining of the two. Also, like Kenny Bradney used to play with Dwayne and Bonnie and Sam, also, and then there's a lot of crossovers going on. Greg and Lowell are really good friends. Greg was a huge Little Feat fan and great friend of Lowell, and there's all these interconnections between and it makes a lot of sense because they're the two best American bands, I'd say, with the band.
Yeah.
Of the 6, those 3 bands, and they're all interconnected. Levon was friends with all of them. Levon was best friends with Richie. Greg was friends with Levon. It's all one family.
Yeah.
Those 3 bands.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely.
And I've worked with iterations of all 3 of them.
Yeah, that's so cool. That is so cool. I'm super excited. When does Rust Belt come out? What's the date?
Well, it's coming out on a small label out of Queens. It's called Immediate Family, and I think the release date is September 21st.
Okay, cool.
And we're playing, I should say, when is this going to air, by the way?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about when you and I get off the air. That's what I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll plug it anyway. We're having our album release party at Levon Helm Studios in Woodstock on Saturday, September 11th.
Okay.
So if this airs before then, they'll have that. And then in New York City, we're going to have one at Rockwood Music Hall Stage 2 in Manhattan on the Lower East Side on Thursday, October 28th.
Okay, cool.
So those are the two release parties.
Excellent.
That's all on my website, ScottGerard.com.
Cool. Well, Scott, I can't thank you enough for taking the time, and I know that you've been, literally navigating your way up the New York Thruway.
Yeah, I'm sorry about all the noise. I ran out of gas and had to stop at a gas station. It's been crazy, man, because we still don't have babysitters, and it's the dog days of summer, so my kids aren't back in school yet. And I just got back from Florida doing a True Fighter course yesterday.
Right.
So I'm running. I have a gig tonight with Brian Mitchell here in Woodstock. I have a gig tomorrow in East Hampton where I'm playing somebody's private party who requested to have me. So I'm running like a chicken with my head cut off. Man.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's better than the alternative.
Well, yeah. I mean, at least we can play outside.
Right. Right. Exactly.
When it doesn't rain.
Right. Man, it's been so cool to talk to you, and I appreciate you taking the time out.
Back at you, man. I had a lot of fun. And we had for your listeners, we had a great conversation before this. We told our 9/11 stories, which I got to say, yours is a whole lot better than mine.
I wouldn't call it better.
Well, a lot more interesting. But look, I mean, thank you for doing what you do. I mean, this format, as I told you in the conversation before, I'm a podcast junkie.
Right.
So I wasn't aware of yours until you reached out to me. So now I got a whole nother thing to listen to while I run.
Well, cool. I invite you to check out the Eric Johnson interview. It's trippy.
How long did you talk about like speaker cables and tube filament?
Oddly enough, we didn't. We had a great I actually posed the question to him, what if you didn't do all this? What if you just went out there with you, a guitar, a cable, and a Princeton? And his response was, I would need 5 other guys to be with me to help me get it done. And I disagree. I disagree because I actually have video proof, and I gave it to him. I have video proof of him with just a Strat, a chord, and a Princeton, and it sounds just like him. So
Well, I mean, he's a phenomenal. I will look forward to it. But it's funny, man, because I've done a lot of the guitar podcasts, and I was on Greg Cox recently. By the way, Greg Cox was a guitar teacher in Uncle Bob's Music in Wisconsin when I first met him when I was 14 years old. And I used to go see Greg play in a biker bar in Cedarburg.
Right.
And he was an early influence of mine.
Uh-huh.
But I was finally on his podcast. We told a lot of stories about all those Milwaukee people I mentioned. It was an awesome. I encourage your people to check it out after this, since we're at the end of this. But I was on Greg's podcast, and again, we kind of talked like in a similar way to you and I, except with Greg and I was more down the old Milwaukee rabbit hole. But we got to the end, and I said, Greg, strings, picks, amps, guitars, this is going to be profoundly disappointing for your listeners. Like, we didn't talk about any guitar shit, like none.
Yeah, I think I've had Greg on the show 4 times, and we don't go there a whole bunch.
Yeah, so I don't know, I've done a bunch of these, and I don't think I've talked about my gear once. So, I don't know what that says about me as a guitar player, but I definitely, I was on Josh Smith's, his television one that he does on
Flat
YouTube,
V. Yeah, the Flat V.
And I remember starting it, and I was just like, Josh, I don't know what I'm going to say to you. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's a guitar podcast with you. Like, you're like a real guitar player.
Yeah.
I'm
That's funny.
I have like a couple things that I do, but it's like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to show you.
Well, that's funny. You know, when I had Josh on, I went to he was here in Austin, and I went to his Airbnb, and we did a lot of gear. We talked a lot of gear, actually. I was kind of surprised how much gear we talked. But
he's the gear master.
Yeah, he kind of is. Yeah, for sure. Great player.
Well, we hit the 2-hour mark, so congratulations.
Same to you. Well, thanks, man.
I just pulled into Woodstock and ate some lunch and then had the sound check. So
that's fantastic.
We did the drive.
All right, that's fantastic. Well, let me tell you, man, it was great. And if you ever get to Austin, let me know. You got my number. Give me a holler. I'll take you out for some great barbecue if you are a meat eater.
Now wait a second. Hold on. Now you just said the magic word, because I am a over 20-year barbecue connoisseur.
Okay.
Being a man of the road, I've tried to eat it. I've been to Lockhart a couple times.
All right.
Now I am a huge Aaron Franklin maniac. My project during the pandemic was, my friend Connor Kennedy got me into his books, and I got Franklin steak, and I bought a PK 360 grill.
Oh my God.
And I learned how to reverse sear over post oak, and I tell you what, man, if you're ever up here, I will mess you up with a bone-in ribeye, because I got that down to a science.
All right.
But here's the thing. I haven't even tried to touch the goddamn brisket. I still haven't been to Franklin. So, you know, if you got the cell phone number or something, you sound like a man who's well connected. That's my dream, because I've hit all the other ones.
All right. Have you done Blacks out in Lockhart? You did Blacks? Okay. Did you do Sam's over on East 12th Street?
No.
Okay.
That I need to do.
Okay. So that was Stevie's kind of hangout. Him and Tommy used to hang out there a lot. So when you come, I will take you there, and I'm buying.
All right. It's a date.
Okay.
I guarantee you, I guarantee you that next year Whittle Feet will play in Austin. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Okay.
So we'll try to make those things coincide, hopefully.
That sounds good. I'm down. Like I said, I'm buying.
This was a great hang, man. I appreciate it. It was a nice break in my day.
Well, cool, man. I'm glad. And be safe out there, and I wish you all the best.
All right. Thanks so much for having me, bro.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.
December in '69, Uncle Sam called on number one. In Detroit the guitars rang and the children sang, but a cruel winter was sure to come. They had a band, thought they'd try their hand. The music worked its way into their souls. But when his number came, life was never the same. As the first boy was shipped off to get his gun. Michigan sunset, winter's coming in. Pulling the sails under that blood-red sky. One day I'll head south, escape the winter winds. But the cold's in my blood, and the lake in the mud. fight this living hell, but he refused to carry a gun. He'd face the front line down with a medic's pack in hand, convinced that all men are born as one. Maybe there was a silent prayer as the night's first mortal flare cast a light over all those young men. So very far from home, across the world all alone, he wished for one more night on the lake again. Michigan sunset, winter's coming in, pulling the sails under that blood-red sky. One day I'll head south, escape the winter winds, but the cold's in my blood and the lake giving mud, and I know that I'll be back again. He lay there and he dreamed, as brutal as it seemed, as he felt his own warm blood soak through his hands. It happened so fast, this breath would be his last, and his company began to fall back. And the red sky turned to gold, starship's sails swept his soul, and a cold wind blew him far away. While back home a baby cried with tear-filled blue eyes to carry on towards a brand new day. Michigan sunset, winter's coming in, pulling the sails under that blood-red sky. One day I'll head south, escape the winter wind, but the cold's in my blood and the lake giving mud, and I know that I'll be back again. I said I know that I'll be back again.
Check out Guitar Radio Show on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, guitarradioshow.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Find Guitar Radio Show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And remember, if you like the artists you hear on Guitar Radio Show, don't just stream their music, buy it.
GRS Productions.